Hello. This one's going to be a little bit philosophical, a little bit of a thinker, and probably a little bit provocative as well. But, I've always taken the approach that if I think something is valid to talk about, I will talk about it. Um, I no longer monetize, so I don't have to constantly be into a corner with YouTube's ridiculous monetization policy. I just basically say what I want, but I like to think I'm also responsible. I never stir up hatred, or at least from my interpretation, that's not what I'm doing. I just say what I think needs to be said, and people can agree or disagree. Um, so I want to look a bit at human nature insofar as how some people seem to be very driven by what others think, and they seem to just lack any sort of independent thought. It's something it's always made me uncomfortable because I just think it's, very powerful. I don't know who said it, but there's a great quote that, you get, there's nothing more dangerous than a mob or a crowd that is driven by stupidity. That's not verbatim, it's along those lines. In other words, when you get a lot of ignorant people together, that's a very dangerous thing. One ignorant person is fine, but when you get a lot of people together, it just, and they follow the crowd. Um, when I opinionate on things, and I do, I'm pretty opinionated on a lot of things. That might make me a little bit arrogant. Now, I don't strive to be arrogant, and I don't think I am arrogant, but some might interpret it that way. That's my speculation. Some might interpret me being opinionated as arrogant. Okay, that's that. But frankly, I would rather be seen as arrogant than a sheep, than someone who just follows the crowd. I'm quite proud of the fact, frankly, that my whole life I have stood by my views. This doesn't mean I enjoy confrontation. It doesn't mean I will deliberately go out of my way to have a fight. Not at all. There are times when it's diplomatic to avoid confrontation, actually. But what I could truthfully say is I've never pretended to have a position that I don't have. If something makes me uncomfortable or uneasy, I'm not going to say, the opposite just to please people. I might not make a big issue out of it. I might let it go, but I'm not going to BS. That's something I'm not going to do. The only time I think that is really justified is if it's like a life and death situation. If you're, for example, I don't know, say you're kidnapped by terrorists or hostage takers, and lying about a political position or something like that would save your life or the life of people you care about. In that situation, it's obviously understandable. But as a general rule, no, I stand up for what I believe in. And I would, if I have an epitaph on my grave decades from now, I'd like it to say this is a man who stood up for what he believed in, whether it was popular or not. Obviously, it's nice having popularity, but popularity that is without a real conviction is shallow, it's hollow. I'd rather be unpopular and be true to myself than popular and a shallow shell, who's just saying what people want to hear. But anyway, that brings me to my point about how I've observed that some people just cannot seem to think critically. They can't seem to really break down a subject and try and think about it in an objective way. Now, we can't know everything, and I don't pretend that I know everything about every subject. I know there are things I'm ignorant about. There's things that I am not, educated either literally or, figuratively, whatever, in order to comment in great detail. And for that reason, I try to avoid it. So, for example, I couldn't make a lengthy video on economic policies because it's not my background. I don't know enough about the subject, and I'd end up saying ignorant and false things, and then I'd have to put a disclaimer. So I try to avoid doing that. Where I do talk about things and I'm uncertain about them, I always put the caveat, that this isn't verbatim or I'm not entirely sure. If I'm not sure about something, I will conscientiously try very hard not to state it as fact. Um, so we can't know everything. That's fine. That's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Even intelligent people don't know everything, you know. So none of us can expect to know everything. But what really does annoy me is when people make sweeping statements about complex issues or issues to which there are two sides. And I can think of many examples of this. I think this really ties into what I call personality cults. I say what I call, there's different definitions of this, but my interpretation of a personality cult is when someone is idolized to the point beyond all reason, to the point where they are kind of deified, and any counter opinions about their life or personality is immediately destroyed and shut down. And there is a real sense of you must love this person or else. I think that's profoundly unhealthy, and it's always made me uncomfortable. And there's famous examples of it. It's not just kings and queens and presidents. This can be seen in celebrities, very much so, and even some sports personalities. People are idolized to the point of beyond all reason. I mean, recently, the famous Argentine footballer Diego Maradona died, and in Argentina, there were people saying that their life was over because he died. I would not have liked to be in the position of his doctor after that happened, even though he had a long time dependency on drugs and alcohol. So, common sense dictates that at some point that's going to have an effect. But still, there was probably a bit of a backlash against the doctor. There are other similar celebrity personality cults. Some that come to mind, I would argue Michael Jackson. I would argue Muhammad Ali, very much so, and I've spoken about that specifically in videos. And in this country, I would say Princess Diana. Because what's interesting is Earl Spencer himself made an interesting observation in his famous eulogy. He said there was no need to kind of sanctify Diana and put her on this other plane because she was a normal girl in many ways, young woman. She had a sense of humor. She was, so he wasn't even comfortable with the sort of idolization of his sister. And I respect Earl Spencer. I think he's an intelligent man. I think he's got a lot of interesting insight into that world. Um, but she's a good example. I'll just speak about this a little bit because I think it taps into some of the things I'm saying. Um, I genuinely do respect Princess Diana. I think she was a genuinely compassionate person. I mean, that wasn't a facade. You could see when she met people, there was a real compassion there. That wasn't just for the cameras. I think that was very real. And I think that she had a almost childlike quality about her. It's very easy to see why she was so admired. But what I don't like about the whole Diana thing, and I sort of touched on this in my video about Diana and Charles, you type in any video about Camilla Parker Bowles, and it's nothing but sheer vitriol and hate. Um, and I think that's very ugly. So that taps into what I'm talking about because people want to hate Camilla just because she was the other woman. The reality is that both Charles and Diana had affairs. Diana may have had an affair as early as the mid 80s, only a few years into her marriage, with her bodyguard, a man by the name of Barry Manicky, who later died in a cycling accident. And, conspiracy theories can read into that, but she had an affair. In all likelihood, he was dismissed. Charles obviously kept pandering after Camilla. The truth is, it was an unhappy marriage, and I think they were both unhappy. I do think Charles deserves criticism for not being more supportive of his young bride. There's no question about that. I don't think he was a good husband. I don't think he gave the sort of support to her that you could argue Harry has given to Meghan. Right, fine. So he deserves criticism for that. But I don't like the way that Charles and Camilla have been vilified so much in the last 24 years by people who think that they know the whole story. And they weren't there. They only know the public image. They don't know what was happening behind closed doors. And it's very much like the situation today. People are responding emotionally to Harry and Meghan without considering, well, actually, there's two sides to this. So I'm not saying that Charles and Camilla don't deserve criticism. I am saying, though, that the vitriol is perhaps unwarranted. People, many of them from all around the world, they're not even British. They say things like, I really hate this woman for what she done. She will always be hated and stuff like this. It's pure vitriol. You haven't even met Camilla Parker Bowles. Um, Maybe you don't like her personality, fine. But I just think it's really, if people are judging the public personas, then there might be areas where they dislike her, perhaps positions that she takes, whatever. I mean, I've criticized public figures. I've shown contempt for certain public figures. That's the nature of fame. If someone's in the public eye, they're going to be judged in a certain way. But the fact of the matter is, unless there's some monumental change, Charles and Camilla will be our monarch and consort. Charles will be king, and Camilla will be the, if not queen reigning, then duchess reigning. I don't know what title she will have at that time, but it's almost certainly going to happen unless there's some major, major change. So I'll be interested to see what sort of public attitudes are around at that time, not just towards Charles, but towards his consort. I think that people need to let it go. Diana did have a hard time, there's no question about it. But to vilify Charles and Camilla just because the circumstances were as they were. I mean, people say they destroyed her happiness. Well, at the time she died, she had happiness with Dodi Al Fayed, and that's why it was a very tragic event. This was a young woman who died in a terrible car crash, and she was, probably the most famous woman in the world. So it's very understandable that the whole Diana thing was such a big news story. I'm not, under any delusion about that. But it does frustrate me that people won't think for themselves. They'll just follow what everyone else is saying. I really hate Camilla because you don't really know why you hate her. What, because you think she was a homewrecker? Well, both both people in that marriage were having affairs. Diana wasn't exactly a perfect wife either. It sounds cold, but she wasn't. They both had affairs. So if Charles is going to be vilified for that, shouldn't at least the context be considered? That's just one example. I can think of others. And it's a very difficult thing because if you think outside the box, you're immediately denounced as a sort of, I don't know, as being devoid of emotions or devoid of understanding why people feel the way they do. I'm actually a pretty emotional person. I would argue I'm pretty sentimental. What I mean by that is, I can get very angry about certain subjects. I can get very into certain things, very happy about certain things. In that sense, I'm not someone that's distanced from my emotions in that sense. But there is a certain principle here, which is that emotions are important, feelings are important, but they are not more important than facts. They're not. In fact, that's what the argument with Piers Morgan and his co-presenter Alex Beresford was about, or at least part of it was, because Alex Beresford was getting in this thing about. By the way, I don't know the guy. I don't know much about him other than he was drilling with Piers Morgan this morning. He said that that's her lived reality, Piers. That's her lived experience. It's her truth. Now, Morgan fired back, well, I'm sorry, but there's only one truth. There's only facts, and that trumps feelings. On that area, I agree with Morgan. Ultimately, you cannot. Facts aren't something you could just play games with. And this is one thing I really, really dislike about woke ideology. It is much more about feelings and emotions and sentiments than facts. But I don't think it makes someone cold or unfeeling or callous to say that. I consider myself pretty compassionate. When I see rough sleepers, I will often buy them a warm drink or whatever. Not because I'm anything special. I'm not trying to be, you know, I just try to imagine if I'm in their shoes. So it's not that, but I'll just say something about that woke mentality because there's a paradox in that. When they talk about white privilege, they're not caring about the individual lived experience of individual white people. So there's a contradiction there. You can't say you have to respect people's individual life experience. Oh, but we're going to generalize all white people, and you have to be fine with that. Um, it's just really manipulative. So in conclusion, I'm just aware of space here. People just need to try and think objectively and not follow the crowd for the sake of it. It may be that there are times that the majority route, is right. There's times that I've been on the majority side. So I'm not saying that populist opinion is always wrong. Far from it. There's times when there's a reason it's the popular opinion and a good reason. But I also think that there is a tendency for people to have a herd mentality. And I'm not saying that they have that position because it makes them popular or it's an easier position to have. I think it's just easier than thinking critically. It's easy to come out with a statement like, "Oh, I hate Camilla so much," rather than think, well, she done bad things, but maybe there's two sides to this. People don't want to think objectively. And this is very, very true of racial issues. It's again a very big problem because if you have a confrontation between a white person and a black person, woke ideologues, it must be racism. It must be. They don't stop to think about the facts. They don't stop to think about the context. What was really said. No, it must be racism. And it frankly scares me a little bit. The absolutism of their thinking. Um, so I'm not saying that we can't sometimes be in the consensus of popular opinion. Some of my positions are. I find myself in agreement with the majority quite often. But I also find that there's times that I frankly stick my neck out a little bit, not because I'm trying to be brave or noble, but because I just think someone has to balance it out a bit. Someone has to offer a counter view just to balance things out a little bit. I mean, social media is really prominent with this sort of stuff because you go to certain YouTube videos and it's nothing but groupthink. I find that really sad and frustrating, frankly. Because how do you go up against a mentality like that when you dare to think differently than, you're. I'm not saying I've personally been attacked, but it's just unfortunate. People just need to try to. Also, I think if you're going to make a sweeping statement, then back it up. If I say something that's polarizing, if I say something that I know is controversial, I will provide a basis for it. I won't just make a sweeping statement and leave it there. Um, that's just me. I'm not pretending that I always get it right. I'm not saying I know everything. I'm just saying that that's what makes me comfortable. To know that I've at least thought about something rather than just come out with these sweeping statements. It pisses me off, to be honest, because it's quite a prominent mindset, unfortunately. I like the. I know that sounds cynical, but I do think that there are a lot of people that don't want to think for themselves. And it's not necessarily that they can't. I think probably most reasonably educated adults can. It's just they don't want to. Too much of an ask. That's all. Let me know your thoughts.